Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Good Sunday evening. How are we doing this evening, everyone? This is Will Coley, the host of the Call to Freedom here on the amazing and wonderful airwaves. Alhamdulillah, I'm so glad to be back on the airwaves of the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM. Last week, unfortunately, we were having lots and lots of technical difficulties. We were broadcasting for the first time with a new set of software called BAB that I had never used before. And, excuse me, we were having massive amounts of technical difficulties because of that, unfortunately. So hopefully this week the broadcast will be much better than it was last week. Now, as always, I am joined by my amazing co-host. Are you topside tonight, Davi?
Sure am. I'm here. Happy Dyed Chicken Embryo Day.
Dyed Chicken. Yeah. Again,
I mean, some people say Happy Zombie Jesus Day, but technically speaking, as a resident zombie expert, Jesus is not a zombie because he doesn't eat flesh. He invites other people to eat his flesh, and I wish so. I'm going with Dyed Chicken Embryo Day.
So that's the complete opposite of the zombie, right?
Yeah.
Daryl, okay. You're supposed to be being quiet right now. Remember, we're trying to do a professional candidate panel forum here, folks. So yeah, again, we're back again this week. Last week we hosted Austin Peterson with a panel of 5 Muslim voters. Most of them were people that were going to vote for Bernie Sanders. And if Sanders loses the nomination, then that would leave them a bit politically homeless. So we invited them to join us to sit down with the Libertarian candidate. I believe he's second place. Austin is, and Darryl is. By most of the polling I'm seeing, Darryl is a very close third behind him, and McAfee's in fourth. But for some reason, McAfee's on stage at the Stossel debate, and Darryl is not. But we won't get into that because we don't have time for all of that. But we do have Darryl here with us today. Now, Davi, is that you making all that noise over there?
I'm just drinking coffee. It's what I do.
Oh my God, I can just hear the chat. I haven't got it pulled up right now, but I can just see the people in the chat room raising Cain because of all of Davi's background noise like they do every week. So, yeah. So, I've got some, because of the stomach bug, and let me give you this piece of advice, Davi. Because of the stomach bug, I've been drinking green tea with fresh mint because the mint oil actually works as like an whatever it is.
Oh, that's a good idea. I've got some fresh mint.
The bugs that are in your belly, the mint oil, they don't like the mint oil. So, yeah, it is. It's good stuff, and it's great to keep you. Keep you feeling better and not nauseous. That's what I'm drinking tonight instead of coffee, because it turns out coffee and stomach flu are 2 bad things to have together. So
really, it seems to work for me. I don't know why, but
coffee stimulates the intestines, which is not something that you want when you're in the middle of a stomach flu. Anyway, well, so to get back to what we're actually supposed to be doing on this completely unprofessional radio show tonight is our candidate forum. So music, and all that kind of stuff, and the ticker tape and the glitter. Tonight with us we have Darryl W Perry. He's running for the Libertarian nomination to run as the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. And if my phone would quit going to sleep, I'd read his bio to you. Now, Darryl Perry was born in Birmingham, Alabama. He's a Southerner like myself. He grew up in the surrounding areas, spent most of his adult life as an advocate and activist for peace and liberty. He's an award-winning author, publisher, and radio TV host. He's a regular contributor to several weekly and monthly newspapers, hosts a daily newscast, FPPR Radio News, and thrice weekly podcast, Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, as well as the weekly podcast, Free Press Publications Freedom Minute, and is a regular co-host of Free Talk Live. Darryl's the owner and managing editor of Free Press Publications, a business he started in June 2009 with the purpose of ensuring a free press for the freedom movement. The goal of Darryl W. Perry for president the Darryl W. Perry for President campaign is to run the most libertarian presidential campaign in history, to promote the ideas of liberty as boldly and as often as possible, and to give as many people as possible the chance to vote for an actual libertarian in November 2016. So say hello to everybody, Darryl.
Thanks for having me on again, Will.
How's it going, Darryl?
Good.
Welcome back.
It's great to have you on again tonight with us, Darryl. Darryl, if you're a longtime listener, you'll know Darryl joined us way back at the beginning of the show on our second or third episode, and now he's running for president. So we've decided that we'll have him on and give him the opportunity to talk about his campaign. Now, before next, we're going to introduce our panelists tonight. Now, the first panelist, he is a native of Somalia. He's multilingual. I know him as Abu Zaid, but he goes by Ismail Wasame. He lived and traveled through more than a dozen countries and over 30 states in the U.S. He went to Oregon State. He joined Oregon State University in 2010. He's been charged with providing in-person, telephone, and email advising to international students on immigration regulations, academic, personal, financial, social, and cross-cultural concerns. Now, he currently serves on numerous campus committees, including but not limited to infectious diseases response team, suicide prevention work group, the student care team, and is a member of Oregon State University's faculty mediation team. He's also the main contact person for international students in crisis and leads the ISAS assessment team, which is responsible for collecting, advising data, interpreting, and writing up annual assessment reports. He holds a bachelor's degree in international affairs and a master's degree in education from the University of Maine, and studied abroad at the American University in Cairo, Egypt, as an undergraduate student. He likes to see the world through multiple perspectives, which enables him to engage effectively with multicultural issues in higher education. So everybody say hello to Ismail.
So welcome to the party.
Okay, now I see that he's here, and he's not muted, but I don't hear him.
I hear somebody, but it's really faint and far away.
So do I. I don't know what it is. And I don't know what's with the feedback tonight, too. We've got a little more feedback than we normally have. So, there we go. All right. Well, we'll hopefully Abu Zaid or Ismail will pop up in just a second. I guess that's him texting me right now. I really need to turn that off. And I'm going to read the introduction for the next person so that I can turn it off. So moving along, we have also with us tonight tahira Shabahz. She's a Muslim resident of Georgia, the mother of two teenagers, an operations manager for an environmentally friendly agricultural product manufacturer, concerned about the economy, the environment, social justice, but most of all, the current climate of fear-mongering happening in the media and by certain mainstream candidates, looking for a candidate who will fight for the rights of minorities of every stripe. Assalamu alaikum, Tahira.
Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you with us tonight. So without further ado, we'll continue on introducing the rest of the panel tonight. We also have with us another young voter, sister. Her name is Malak Fakhoury. She was born in Central Florida. She's the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, so she's a second-generation American, and she is a senior at the University of South Florida studying sociology. Assalamu alaikum, Malak.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, and thank you for being with us tonight. Now, we also have with us now. We tried to avoid having libertarians on with us, and we had to break that rule tonight. And I'll introduce him as soon as we get back. And I guess after I introduce him, I'll let him go ahead and ask his question when we get back here on Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. And we're back here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. So the introductions took a little longer than we'd hoped, and it does seem that, unfortunately, we are having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Abu Zaid, we can hear him, and we can all hear each other, but for some reason, Abu Zaid can't hear any of us. So we're working on getting that taken care of. It'll probably be at least one more commercial before he gets an opportunity to ask his question anyway, so hopefully we can get that fixed in that time. But we're back. And I'm going to introduce our final panelist. Normally we have 5, but there's been a lot of issues. We had 2 cancellations tonight due to stomach flu, and then I myself personally and one of my kids were in the hospital due to a stomach flu yesterday. And then Davi, it turns out, has some kind of stomach thing tonight. So I guess and when I was at the hospital, we were at the ER because, being Easter weekend, pediatricians, doctor's offices, all that stuff, clinics, all that stuff was closed. So we had to go to the ER, and he said that almost half of the people that they were seeing for the last 2 days were people that were in for stomach issues. So I guess it's just something that's going around. But without
the world's first internet transmitted stomach bug.
Yeah, there we go. All right, well, our last panelist tonight is Mike Haase, and we actually broke a rule. Normally we wouldn't have libertarians
on the panel.
Yeah, we don't normally have libertarians on the panel, but tonight, because of all the stomach and everything else, we decided to break our rule. Plus, this is a really special guy here. His name's Mike Haase. Now, he's a father of 3, also a grandfather. He's been an RN for 20 years, specializing in emergency nursing and pharmaceutical research. He's a former president of one of the largest nursing union locals in the country, as well as an Eagle Scout and a former Scoutmaster. He's the treasurer of the Warren County, Ohio Libertarian Party, and he is a delegate at this year's LP National Convention. He also spends his free time watching Eric play football for the Davidson Wildcats. So, hey, what's up, Mike? How are you tonight?
Assalamu alaikum. Well,
Walaikum salam. So, since we had the issues and everything else, I figure we'll just go ahead, since we're on you, we'll go ahead and start with you and open the floor up and give you the opportunity to ask Darryl your question now.
Hey, Darryl.
Do we still have Darryl? Darryl, you here? Hello?
Daryl's here, but his microphone is muted. I think he forgot how to turn it back on. Either that or he stepped away and went to the bathroom for a second, didn't tell anybody. There we go.
Well, I'll field the credit. For Darryl. How about that?
Yeah, right. You talk like a Darryl talks like a voluntarist, so this is fun. This is fun.
No conflict of interest whatsoever. None. If one of the hosts comes in as a spokesman for the guest.
No. Well, let's not make it completely obvious that I've endorsed Darryl. That the show hosts, at least one of them has gotten behind Darryl's candidacy, at least more so than the other candidates. But we are giving equal time. Come on now, we are doing the judicious thing. We are giving equal time to all the candidates. We'll have Austin, and we'll have Feldman, and we'll have Darryl, and we'll have McAfee, and if Gary Johnson quits ducking and dodging us, we'll have Johnson. So it looks like we just had one drop out. Next, so where's Darryl? Darryl, hello, are you there?
Well, someone want to shoot out a question, and we can at least field it until we figure out what happened with Darryl.
All right. Apparently, I got muted on the computer that is not in front of me.
Yeah, that's
I did not do it. Ian did not do it. So we were trying to figure out that.
Yeah,
okay.
That was me being a good professional producer on my end. because I heard.
All right, cooking with gas.
Microphone, yeah.
But you can't unmute.
Yep. I can't unmute. Yeah, I can't unmute you, but I can mute you. Isn't that the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard? I can mute you, but on my end, once I mute you, like I can't do anything about it once you're muted. So, all right, Mike, let's have your question. Woohoo!
Absolutely. I'm not in front of the computer, so please don't mute me.
Okay, Darryl.
Yes.
Yeah. Since immigration seems to be one of the bigger subjects of the donkeys and the elephants this year, what would be your approach in dealing with the undocumented immigrants that are in the country currently?
Don't deport them. That would be the simple answer. And now let me just talk about immigration as a whole. Because as a libertarian, I believe that nobody has a moral obligation to follow an unjust law. And the immigration laws that currently exist, I believe, are extremely unjust because there's not one set of rules for immigrating. So, for instance, Cuba, there's a policy called the wet foot, dry foot policy, meaning that anyone from Cuba who gets to the United States has what are called dry feet, and they get to stay. But for people from every other country in the world, there's different rules, and those rules are different for pretty much every country. Although, if you have like a high-level degree, then you might be able to go a little bit further to the front of the line. If you're a really good athlete and you can win a gold medal for the United States in the Olympics, then front of the line. You can throw a football really good, really far. You can run really fast, front of the line. So it's a really arbitrary system that is set up. So what I would love to see is a wet foot, dry foot policy that applies to the entire world, although I would do away with the wet foot portion of the wet foot, dry foot policy. Because what happens with the wet foot portion of the wet foot, dry foot policy is that the U.S. Coast Guard will patrol the waters between Florida and Cuba looking for people with what are deemed wet feet so that they can send them back to Cuba. So what I would love to see is something that most people would call an open borders policy, to where anybody that can come to the United States without using government funds of any sort should be allowed to come here and stay here as long as they're not infringing on the rights of anyone else.
Hey, can you clarify what wet foot and dry foot immigration is? I've never heard these terms before. I think I've inferred what they mean, but can you just spell it out for me?
Wet foot, dry foot. It's the policy that the United States government has with people from Cuba. So if you're in a boat and you're in the water between Cuba and Florida, you are deemed to have wet feet and thus subject to return to Cuba or whatever Caribbean nation you were in before you left Cuba or after.
Very cool. Very
Cuba.
Cool. All right. Well, so Mike, do you need any clarification on that?
No.
Awesome. We'll get to the next question when we get back on LRN. And we're back here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. So, yeah, we're still having the issues with Ismail, but we're trying to figure out a way. Basically, everybody can hear him, but he can't hear us. So we may just give him the opportunity. I'll send him a text, tell him to ask his question, and let him ask his question of the candidate that way. And then he can hang up and listen to the answer that he was given. So we're going to go ahead and go on to our other panelists, though. We're going to get with Malak. Sister Malak Fakhoury. We'll go with you next. So you have the floor, and Mr. Darryl Perry's ear.
Hey, Mr. Darryl, thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Basically, obviously Trump, he's done a lot of damage with his Islamophobic rhetoric, and he's done a great job of making Muslims feel as if they're not safe from hate crimes or wanted in this country. So I was wondering, how could somebody go about planning to repair some of this damage? What amends could they make to make Muslims feel welcome, make them feel safe after everything that's been done in the past months?
Well, I would say that it goes back further than the past months. I would say that, at least in my experience, a lot of the damage that's been caused between the American government and the Muslim community goes back about 15 years. You can trace it back almost to September 11th, 2001, when horrible events happened. And then George W. Bush said it's the Muslims, but this is not a holy war, but we're declaring war basically on Muslims. And just to clarify, when I just said we, I am not including myself. I was paraphrasing George Bush. Essentially, the United States government declared war on Islam in 2001 because of the actions of 19 hijackers. And I don't know how you go about repairing that other than to attempt to apologize to a huge number of people for death and destruction that has been caused for actions that they did not do. And I realize that I'm not exactly answering your question, and that's because I don't know how to answer the question. I don't know how to apologize for things that were horrible things that were done by a government claiming to represent me. And I don't consent to any of what was done. It was not done in my name. Unfortunately, some of it was done with my tax dollars, but it's kind of hard to not pay for things when money is stolen from you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your honesty and tracing it back much further. That's absolutely correct. It's just, we talk about issues such as this a lot in my sociology classes, about if the media could get involved or if it could be worked into the education system to try to normalize Muslims again.
Well, the media and the education system to some extent have been involved, and that's part of why there's still a problem, is because for the media, and I say this as a member of the media is going to do things that gets them ratings, and unfortunately fear-mongering gets them ratings. Mm-hmm. So most people that are in the media, they're not going to dig deeper to try to find out what is really happening. They're just going to look on the surface and report the thing that they see on the surface.
They're not going to do what you did. They're not going to do what you have done. Basically.
They're not going to say the man is bleeding because he was shot by a police officer, or the man is bleeding because fill in the blank. They'll just report on the bleeding. And that's really what's happening. The stuff over the last several months, the Donald Trump saying he wants to send everybody that's from Syria back to Syria. He wants to prevent Muslims from coming into the United States. That's the bleeding. And they're not looking at why there's bleeding. And we need to look at why there's bleeding. And we need to look at the reasons that the 9/11 happened. And we need to look at the reasons that things prior to 9/11 happened. Back in the 90s, I forget exactly what year, there was the bombing on the World Trade Center. We need 93. To look at why did that happen. That happened because the U.S. government has been meddling in the Middle East since the 1950s. At least since the 1950s. And there's the argument of, well, we don't know who threw the first punch. And exactly, we don't. We've forgotten at this point who threw the first punch. And that's because you're basically, you've got militaries that are fighting a glorified bar fight to where nobody remembers who threw the first punch. They don't even remember when the first punch was thrown. And everybody's just so drunk on anger and rage and alcohol that they're going to keep throwing fists and throwing chairs and throwing missiles and bombs and killing people instead of stopping the throwing of fists and chairs and missiles. So we need to take a step back. And to quote the movie War Games, where there's the computer that's doing the simulation of a nuclear attack, At the end, the computer says the only way to win is not to play the game. And that's the only way that you win a global war on terror, is to not play the game, because war by its very nature is terror.
Now,
Thank you.
Now, some commentary on some of the things that you said there, Darryl. When you were talking about the media, you were talking about media and yourself being a member of the media, but I've been listening to you as a member of the media for a number of years, and you've never done any of the things that you just sat and accused the media of. As a broad scope, you yourself
to be a responsible member of the media.
Exactly, responsible media members, and you yourself have been a very responsible member of the media. I've heard you myself give dissertations on Islamic jurisprudence, on foundations in Sharia, where you actually talk about things that sometimes even Muslims don't know, and I've heard you defend the Muslim community on AM and FM talk radio for years, from attacks from people who would, encourage things like turning Mecca into a sheet of glass, or, deporting or interning all of the Muslims. You've had callers who have called into the show that you work on who have advocated these sorts of things. And I've heard you defend against that kind of insane kind of rhetoric from people myself. Things that no Republican and most Democrats are afraid to stand up against, and a lot of you do it without
stand up against it,
and you do it without batting an eye.
Yes, because I know it's right.
It's something that's it's strange to see a candidate who does stuff like that, where you're not worried about what's going to get you the ratings on your show, even though the show that you work on is a huge show. 164 stations, 170 stations, something like that now around the country. That's an enormous show by talk radio show standards. And you guys still, not just your co-hosts on your broadcast, do what all of these other people are totally afraid to do, what even Muslims are afraid to do. And I just have to say, for a political candidate, that's something that I respect, and it's why I've supported your candidacy, is because you stand up in the face of people that even people in my own community are afraid to stand up to.
Thank you.
So we'll go on to the next question. We'll probably get the question out just before it's time to go to break. But we still have with us another sister. She came to me through Muslims for Progressive Values, though I'm not particularly sure if she actually works with them. Sister Tahira, are you still with us?
Yes. Sorry,
Awesome.
couldn't find my mute button.
That's all right. So, you have the floor now, sister, and the candidate's ear. Oh, wait, you will have the floor, and you will have the candidate's ear in just a few moments, right here on the Call to Freedom, right when we get back on LRN.FM. And we're back here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. And what we've been doing tonight, just like last week, we've been doing a series of candidate forums where we're allowing I guess you could say we were allowing third-party candidates to come on and have a chance to reach out directly to members of the Muslim community. It's about a 7 million member community, about 3 million voters in the Muslim community in the United States. And we're influential enough that you have Muslims in the top brass of the Libertarian Party, as well as a number, I think between 12 and 15 this year, delegates in the Libertarian Party that are Muslim. So, of course, we would have some Libertarian candidates that we're going to to be on with us. And tonight we have one of those candidates with us, Mr. Darryl W Perry, and he's been answering questions from our panel of Muslim voters. And we had gotten to Sister tahira, and it is your turn to take the floor, sister.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Darryl. Can you expound on your environmental policy? Specifically, how would you ensure that removal of government regulations or downsizing of the EPA doesn't leave particularly impoverished communities more vulnerable to situations like the current water crisis in Flint, Michigan?
Well, the water crisis in Flint, Michigan happened because of government, not because of a lack of government. There was a water spill or a water pollution incident in Colorado a few months ago. Again, it was caused because of government, specifically caused by the EPA, to where there were EPA inspectors out with some heavy machinery around a capped off mine, and they punctured something and wound up causing millions of gallons of pollution to run off into a river. And again, that was caused by the EPA. That was caused by government, not by some private company because of a lack of government oversight. So you really have to look at what's happening and the problems and see that most of the problems that we have now that deal with pollution are because of government, not because of a lack of government. One of the big instances that happened just a couple of years ago that has really negatively impacted the Gulf Coast was the BP oil spill. And that was caused technically by a private company, but they were doing something that they otherwise would not have done had government not limited their liability. So when that I believe it was the Deep Horizon oil rig, when it exploded, and again, millions of gallons of oil wound up flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, BP's liability was limited by government. BP did not have to pay the full extent of the cleanup. In fact, they didn't even pay, I think it was barely 10%. And again, that was because of government regulations, to where after the Exxon Valdez incident back in either the late 80s or early 90s, the U.S. federal government decided we're going to limit the amount of money that oil companies have to pay to clean up problems where they wind up spilling oil. And so they put this arbitrary cap of, I believe it was $175 million. Even though a lot of these oil spills wind up costing billions of dollars to wind up cleaning up. So you have these problems that happen, again, because of government, not because of a lack of government or a lack of government oversight. And also there are other government policies in place to where government regulations say that it's okay to pollute a certain amount, and anything over that certain amount, you can get permission from us, and then we'll either give you a yay or a nay. In a free society, absent government regulations, if BP spills oil on your property, you would be able to sue BP and hold the people that spilled the oil liable for cleaning up your property. As it stands now, there are all kinds of liabilities against you being able to sue the companies that pollute your oil or pollute your ground, pollute your water, pollute your food, etc. So what you really need to do is get rid of the regulations, but allow people to actually wind up suing people when people wind up causing some sort of harm. And that's not what you have with government regulations in place.
Well, the whole idea behind limited liability is to create this situation where the state protects the owners of the business. So the people who made the rash decisions, the people who made the bad decisions to buy cheap equipment, to do things cheaply, they themselves can never actually be on the hook for the bad decisions that they made because of what you said, limited liability in a corporation literally creates a wall of protection of them from accountability to the public for the actions that their business does under their leadership.
I think you make good points. That as someone who grew up in Pittsburgh, at the end of the steel boom, I saw how filthy it was before the EPA came in and forced them to clean up the water, the air. So that's where my concern would be with limiting the EPA.
Right. And, a lot of the pollution that was happening was, again, because companies were not being held liable.
Sure.
And that's because of government regulations that prevent people from holding them liable. Right now, there are regulations, and I realize you're asking about the environment, but pharmaceutical drugs. In most cases, the drug manufacturer is shielded from liability unless there's some sort of proof that they acted in a negligent manner. So if it's just, we're telling you this is a side effect, so therefore it's not negligent, so you can't sue us. And the same way with a lot of the big companies, to where they get special favors from government to where they can't be sued unless it's deemed that they acted in a negligent manner. And I would say that running pollution into the drinking water is negligent, but government doesn't think so. So therefore, the companies are shielded from being held accountable for making horrible, rash decisions. So again, it's a problem caused by government, not a problem caused by lack of government.
Darryl, that sounds like you would be against limited liability as a concept, not just like in the environmental sphere, but in the corporate sphere. Is that right? Am I reading you right?
Correct.
Did it.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Now, just to clarify, in my own personal opinion would be that in a free society where you didn't have these government organizations or institutions that were put into place, property rights would be respected. Like individual property rights would be respected. And if you have individual property that was damaged by pollution from a business, then that business would then be liable for those damages. And you wouldn't need a government regulatory body in order to do this. All you'd need
It'd be a class action lawsuit.
Exactly. It'd be a class action suit. You prove that pollution causes
everyone who breathes the air can now sue you.
Exactly. You now have, if you can prove that certain emissions that come out of a business's smokestack cause cancer, then every person who has lung cancer could possibly have a case against them if you had a free society where people were actually held accountable for their actions against other people, instead of what you have now, where you have a society that the state literally acts as a protector between the people who carry out these unsafe actions and the people who are harmed by those actions.
You know what's interesting? This had not occurred to me until just now, but in a regulatory environment, if the government goes after a company for environmental regulation violations, they issue fines that the corporation pays to the government for violating the regulation, and they're expected to fix it or whatever. But if it's a class action lawsuit, then the person damaged by the environmental damage sues the company and receives a settlement or receives a reward for their damages. So you're actually damaging the harmed party, not paying the government.
Well, yeah, because like what happened with the EPA, if I have property on that river, well, now my property value, not only has my property value been damaged, but I could possibly, that could have been a source of sustenance for me. Now my ability to effectively support myself has been damaged. You can take that to a court. That is a civil case. Your negligence damaged my property, and now because of that, I have the ability to go after you individually. And if everybody that lives on a river comes after you, you can put a company out of business, and that would keep companies in line. And we'll get into more with Abu Zaid Jardi's comment and question on the other side when we come back on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM.
All right, guys, I'm back.
And we're back here on the Call to Freedom, LRN.FM. Davi's back. I'm back. We're all back here on the Call to Freedom. We've been having a dialogue with our candidate that we've got with us tonight. I think we still have all of our panelists with us. Oh no, Malak left. I guess she'll be back in a moment. But we do have Ismail with us. He can't hear us on the air. He can hear us. He's listening to us live on LRN.FM, but we can hear him. So we're going to give him the opportunity to ask his question to Darryl, and then he'll listen. He'll be able to listen in live, like the rest of you guys are, to hear what the answer to that question is. As soon as I get him queued up here. So now, after we get done with this round of questions, we'll do like we did last week, and we're going to kind of open the floor for discussion. And but before that, we're going to go ahead and get to Ismail's question as soon as he unmutes his microphone. Okay. So I guess we've covered some pretty good topics so far, wouldn't you say, Darryl?
Yes.
As by when we finally get around to Ismail coming back, I guess he's stepped away as well. So if Mike,
while we wait,
yeah, do Mike or T have another question?
I'm still here.
Do you have a question, Davi?
No, I'm letting you guys know that I'm here. Are we missing a panelist? Is that why we're? Yeah, we came back from break and we're missing a panelist, but we've still got Michael and T here. So I guess we're just going to go ahead and get into the kind of not so. I got a question.
Scripted.
So like, I don't remember the duration, but they talk about the like first 10 days as president or something. Like, what's the first thing President Perry does?
The very first thing that I do, assuming that I'm allowed to actually take actions as president, because I don't know if I could actually take the oath of office, but the first thing that I would attempt to do is pardon Chelsea Manning. The second thing I would attempt to do is pardon Ross Ulbricht. The third thing is drop all charges against Edward Snowden. And then there would be a blanket pardon for all nonviolent federal drug offenders. And after that, there would be a blanket pardon for all other nonviolent offenders that had no identifiable victim. So anyone like Private Manning that's serving time for whistleblowing, for example, would wind up getting a pardon from President Perry. I would then work on the process of bringing home all of the troops that are stationed in the roughly 900 military bases around the globe. And I would order all combat operations to cease immediately. And further, I would specify to every federal law enforcement officer and every federal employee that's in any way tasked with overseeing inmates that you most certainly are not allowed to do anything that relates to torture. And I learned something from your book, Authoritarian Sociopathy, Davi, that Dr. Zimbardo was an expert witness on behalf of the federal government in the Abu Ghraib trial, and he testified that most likely the federal government never told their people that were acting as prison guards to torture, and that's because you don't have to. You just give them as vague instructions as possible, and torture will happen naturally. I know, he said, because he operated what was essentially Abu Ghraib back in the 1970s, and his Abu Ghraib was the Stanford prison experiment. So you have to explicitly tell them, don't torture and don't rape the inmates. Otherwise, you can expect them to either torture or rape the inmates, and that is really sad to say that you have to tell people not to do horrible, despicable things.
Yeah, so you'll find a kind of brief summary of that concept. It's the idea that the science tells you the fishbowl in which torture occurs. So rather than giving orders to torture, you just put the soldiers in that fishbowl.
Yes.
But the more thorough explanation of all of the science and all of the psychology behind it is the Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo. That's what I was summarizing in my book, because I was covering other topics too.
Yeah, and it's a very good book, and I'm not just saying that because you wrote it and I like you as a person, or that I'm also not saying it because I published it. I published it because it's a good book.
Well, thank you. So talk about the oath of office. What do you mean you might not be able to take the oath of office?
Well, the oath of office requires one to swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. And, well, as Lysander Spooner said back in the 1860s or possibly 1870s, I forget exactly when he wrote it, the Constitution has either authorized such tyranny as we have or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. Now, I don't think that I could rightly swear to uphold a document that I think should not exist. So that's why I say I don't know if I could actually take the oath of office. And one of the things that I'm running on is a platform to actually abolish the United States federal government. And that runs quite contrary to the U.S. Constitution that formed the United States federal government.
I love you, Darryl. You're awesome. So here's what I got. Here's what I got for you guys. Zaid is listening, but he would rather than try to, deal with all the technical stuff. He sent me his question along with like a short personal statement, and I guess it kind of goes along the same lines of what Davi just asked you. So I'm going to go ahead and give you Abu Zaid's question. So this is from he works at Oregon State University. He is a Somali refugee. He's now an American citizen. And he's voting. And his question is, thank you, Darryl, for joining us. I appreciate your time, and I salute the Libertarian movement. I think it's a good cause, and I actually voted for Ron Paul before. But my question is a bit of a philosophical one. Isn't it an oxymoron to be, quote, condemning government in general, all the while one is seeking to win the highest seat in the government? I ask this question because this is one of my problems with the movement.
And I can certainly understand where he's coming from, and it does seem contradictory. However, one should know that just because I'm running for an office does not mean that I'm seeking the office, if that makes any sense. And let me explain to make sure that I clarify. People pay attention to presidential elections, which means that people pay attention to presidential candidates. Presidential candidates then get platforms that they otherwise would not get. So if I were just some guy saying the federal government should be abolished, then I would not be getting invited to attend all of these state conventions. The media coverage that I have received, I most likely would not be receiving.
You wouldn't be sitting here with us tonight.
More media coverage, and I would not be getting that if I were, again, just some random guy. So I'm running for the office to spread a message. And people need to realize that when you run as a libertarian, and a lot of Republicans that run as Republicans and a lot of Democrats that run as Democrats also need to realize that there's a good chance they're not going to be the person that wins. So what you need to do is run to spread a message, not run to win the office. Now, running for political office in some ways is kind of like applying for a job, but in a lot of ways it is not. Because there are a lot of jobs that I think it might be fun to apply for and go have an interview, but I know I'm not qualified for it. I know I'm not going to get. But running for president is different in that basically the entirety of the American population is the potential employer, and everybody wants to have their own little interview.
Right, well, when we get back, we'll get into all that and more here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM.
Yeah, it sounds like
Oh, yeah. So we are back here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. It is a beautiful Sunday night. People are at home. They've been, collecting Easter eggs or celebrating their pagan holiday, or I think it's the end of Passover. Well, no, they're not following the Hebrew calendar for Easter this year. So, yeah, there isn't a Jewish holiday going on right now, even though technically there should be.
Easter falls on Passover.
Normally it does. Normally it does, but this year there's like a different thing going on for some reason. They're not following the Hebrew calendar. I don't know why. I mean, I don't really care, but anyway. So yeah, we've had a candidate with us, candidate for president, Mr. Darryl W Perry. He's been answering questions from our panel. We just floated a question about a philosophical question about Darryl running for president, and it doesn't look like Abu Zaid needs any clarification on that. A follow-up comment is, I'm a taxpayer and a father and a husband, and I'm interested in someone who has a chance in winning, not just making a statement. When the movement succeeds and reaches the level of Ron Paul, or when the two-party system collapses, then I may reconsider. So now I know Zaid is a serious burner. He's been trying to convince me to convert to the dark side for quite a long time, and I've been trying to convince him to convert to the Force for just as long. But when the fixed system that does exist gets done shooting at Bernie Sanders and spitting him out, much like they did to Ron Paul in the 2012 election cycle, he will be politically homeless, because I have heard him state on multiple occasions that under no circumstances whatsoever will he ever vote for Hillary Clinton, because she's a liar and a thief, but so's Bernie. So taxation is theft. So but he and many other Muslim voters will be politically homeless, basically, when Bernie Sanders loses. And, we want to try to give them the opportunity to meet some of the other candidate options that are out there. Give those candidates the opportunity to speak directly to members of our community that kind of represent a makeup of our community. And the makeup of our community is mostly Bernie Sanders supporters. So, we've kind of gone out of our way to find people that we're probably going to be supporting Bernie Sanders in the election this year. And so that's kind of what our panel is staffed with the exception of Mike, of course, who is a delegate for the Libertarian Party at the National Convention, which I will be speaking at. Alhamdulillah, the first Muslim to ever speak at a party's national convention ever. I will be addressing the Libertarian Party convention on Friday.
Hold on, Will. I thought Barack Obama, when he was still a senator, spoke at the Democratic National Convention in 2000, and there's a bunch of people that say he's a Muslim. Oh, good Lord. Does he not count?
I don't know. Maybe if you could say the word hadith properly. Or could tell the difference between basic Islamic terms, like if you call the adhan a prayer, a song, and something else in the same sentence, and then you get the shahada mixed up with that, your credibility as a Muslim is pretty thin to me. But, if he says that he says La ilaha illallah, then who am I to judge? But he doesn't say that he says that on top of it. So he says he's not Muslim, so that's good enough for me to believe that he's not a Muslim. But, those other things added in just kind of drove that point home for me. But we have an open floor now. So basically anybody that's interested in asking the candidate a question, Malak, Michael, or tahira, we open the floor to you. So who's first?
Well, I just want to present the counter preference. I am not interested in a candidate who can actually win. I wouldn't wish that burden on anybody I actually cared about.
Right? Have you seen how awful people look after they get done, like after they've won and they've been in the presidency for 4 or 8 years?
Well, it's also just the moral hazard of the office, right? It's that It's so like voters are in this uncomfortable position of being forced by the system to vote for a lesser of evils, right? And so they have to choose an evil once every 4 years. A president is immediately thrown into the position of choosing between lessers of evils like 12 times a day.
Yeah.
So like I would not want that job.
Right, and one of the reasons, let me just sort of explain one of the reasons people are sort of forced into this lesser of two evils sort of thing, even though there's, in most states going to be 3 or upwards of probably 8 candidates on the ballot, depending on what state you're in. But people say, like, I've got to choose the lesser evil. And that's because of the electoral system that we have, where we've got what's called first past the post, winner take all, to where if you wind up getting one more vote than everybody else on the ballot, it doesn't matter if you wind up with only 10.1% of the vote. If that's more than everybody else, you wind up winning and you get all of the electors. And the electors are who actually count the votes.
It doesn't work that way.
College.
Most states, though, in most states, there are no laws in most states that require the electors, the electoral college, to vote in the same manner that the people.
They're not required. They're not obligated to cast the ballot. So you could have a faithless elector, but the electors are chosen by the political party. So the Libertarian Party will tell the secretaries of state in the 50 states plus DC, here are our electors. Those are people that are party faithful, that are going to do what the party tells them to do in the vast majority of cases. But what you have is winner take all. So in California, for instance, you wind up winning California. Doesn't matter if you win by 1 vote, you get all of California's electors. If we had a proportional system to where you get 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the electors, then there would not be this wasted vote syndrome, because then people would say, okay, the person that I want might not finish first, but he could finish second and get some votes, or he could finish above a certain threshold and get some votes. And then also the 12th Amendment, and most people aren't aware that the 12th Amendment did this. The 12th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is what said that electors cast a vote for president and a vote for vice president. Prior to that, the electors just cast 2 votes. The person with the most votes was president. The person with the second most votes was vice president. That's how you wound up with John Adams as president and someone that he absolutely despised, Thomas Jefferson, as a vice president.
Yeah.
So if we did proportional allocation of electors and got rid of the 12th Amendment, then you would see, at least, based on what I'm seeing from history and, projecting that into the future, I think you would see the wasted vote syndrome go away over time, because people would then say, well, I can actually cast the vote that I want because my candidate might get some electors and he might wind up finishing second to wind up being the vice president.
All right.
Whereas if you vote for the second place guy, then it's like voting for the 12th place guy.
All right. Well, we'll get into that and much more here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM when we come back. And we're back here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM, and we've been, as we've said before, we've had a great discussion here that we've been doing. We've had our panel of 5 Muslim voters. I'm assuming most of which are voting for Bernie. If you're not voting for Bernie and your name is not Mike Haase and you're not a host of this show and you're not the candidate, speak up now. Yeah, see, exactly. So yeah, as I assume, are you voting for Joe Stein instead of Bernie? Tahira?
Oh, no, I'm feeling the burn.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, we assume that they're all currently Bernie supporters, with the exception, of course, of Mike Haase, who's a delegate for the Libertarian Party this year. And if he loses, they're going to be politically homeless, because most people that I know that support Bernie have said unequivocally that they will not support Hillary Clinton if she is the nominee. But I have seen, in the Ron Paul era, that happen. To not happen when they said that they wouldn't vote for the candidate, and then they did anyway. So, but we are giving the opportunity for candidates who are not a part of the duopoly, who aren't Hillary or Bernie or Ted Cruz or Donald Trump, to speak to the Muslim community and reach out to them and talk to them about issues and their approach and views on those issues. And now we've just kind of opened the floor, and we've been chit-chatting with each other about different things that we thought were important to us. And Malak, you have a question?
Yes. So my question is not based so much in policy, but more about perspective. It was triggered by something that was said earlier in response to my question about how damage can be repaired, such as making Muslims feel actually welcomed here. And it was interesting. You said something that I've only heard Muslims say. You said when the government declared the war on Islam, not the war on terror, which I thought was so interesting that you phrased it that way, because again, coming from the victim side, that's definitely how we see it. But I've never heard somebody who's not Muslim say that before. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on if you think the effort is against the religion and the framing and the wars and just all of the violence that's been directed towards Muslims is because of not necessarily the faith, or maybe just the influence that Islam has when it's practiced correctly and not so manipulated and seen so awfully as the West has made it.
Right, and the reason that I'd say that it's a war on Islam is because whenever one of these politicians talks about the war on terror, they always say radical Islam or radical Islamic terror, and so they're conflating the two, while simultaneously trying to say that no, it's not a war against the people of a religion, but saying that it is a war against the people of a religion, or people that are probably not correctly connected to the religion. So what I would consider to be nominal Muslims. So the people that say, oh yeah, I'm a Muslim, because they look at Islam as a cultural thing, the way a lot of Catholics look at Catholicism as a cultural thing. So you've got nominal Catholics that may or may not ever go to Mass, but they will call themselves Catholic. And I'm sure that of the 1 billion Muslims, there are a lot of Muslims that will say that they are Muslim but never go to mosque. They never go on the Hajj. They never do any of the things that Muslims are supposed to do.
Well, a lot of them actually will do that. They'll do just those things, but they won't show up to the masjid.
They'll go to the mosque on Easter and Christmas.
Yeah. Ramadan Muslims. You see them in the masjid during Ramadan. You see them in the masjid during Eid, and they probably pay to host some big Hajj tour that they do, and then that's it. That's the only time that you even know that they exist.
Right. So the nominal Muslims that are, I would dare say, the vast majority of the quote-unquote Christians in the United States that don't actually attempt to follow the teachings of the religion that they claim for themselves. So you've got people like George W. Bush and Barack Obama and all of the horrible people running for the Republican presidential nomination, and Hillary and Bernie, that every now and then they'll talk about radical Islamic terror, and even Gary Johnson and the Libertarian Party will do that as well. And they're trying to conflate the act of terrorism with the people of a religion or a culture.
Well, they're also promoting policies that are wide nets, right? Like Ted Cruz recently said something along the lines of wanting increased police presence in predominantly Muslim neighborhoods. So it's sort of like, it would be absurd to say that World War II was a war on radical Japan. They targeted all of Japan, including the Japanese people here in America. That's right. The way these things operate.
Right. So, you've got the people that are making the policies that are conflating a religion and a culture, and essentially they are declaring war on the people that practice a religion or claim to practice a religion, whether or not they, rightly practice that religion or not. So I think it's only fair to say that it's a war against the Muslims. And I hate that it has to be that. But, if you say we're declaring a war on this specific action, which is what war on terror is, terrorism is an action or a set of actions. You don't win a war against a set of actions by doing the actions that you're trying to stop.
What do you think of the...
If you look at the definition of terrorism, and I don't have it in front of me, but the definition is basically to terrorize a population for the purpose of bringing about political or social change.
And that's what the United States... They changed the definition. I looked the other day. I swear it's different. Maybe this is that whole Mandela effect that you guys were talking about on LRN, about on Free Talk Live a couple weeks ago. But I swear that the last time that I looked at the definition of terrorism, it didn't have the words carried out by non-state actors in the definition. But now when you look up
that's the CIA's contribution to the definition. If you look at government definitions, they always say something like by sub-state actors or non-state actors.
Basically now terrorism,
because they just get to exonerate themselves.
Yeah, terrorism is the kind of violence that you're talking about, where you use violence in order to affect political against innocent people in order to affect political change by any entity that's not associated with the state. So if the state does it, that changes whether or not it's terrorism. According to the definition now, violence for political ends isn't terrorism if it's carried out by someone associated with a government. So now ISIS, well, then that would mean ISIS, it isn't terrorism because ISIS claims to be a state then. So that means what they're doing is terrorism by the definition.
I mean, the really funny thing about that is if you go way back, the original definition of terrorism was government by intimidation. So it's been totally flipped on its head. It now means the opposite of what it meant before.
Now it's the use of violence to intimidate government by the populace. Like you or I using violence against the government, that is terrorism. The government using violence against us is not.
From Merriam-Webster. And the full definition of terrorism is the systematic use of terror, especially as a means of coercion.
Well, that's the IRS right there. I definitely only send in paperwork to the IRS because I'm afraid.
What Merriam-Webster lists as the simple definition is the use of violent acts to frighten the people in an area as a way of trying to achieve a political goal. And that's most certainly what the United States federal government does, not just internationally, but domestically as well, is they will frighten people in an area to try to achieve a political goal.
All right, well, we will get into more uncomfortable truths here when we get back on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. And we're back here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. We've had an amazing discussion tonight, and we were just getting into it when the break music hit us, and we had to go out. So I want to get right back into the discussion. Malak was trying to break in. You have, three radio professionals here who are used to talking and running our mouth for a living, and then you have, some of the people that are on with us say, don't know how to get a word in edgewise. It's easy. It's really, really easy, Malak. What you do is you unmute your microphone and you say, hey, guys, shut up. And usually we will stop at least at the fact that somebody said shut up and be like, what? And then you can get in. Then you can, but that's probably the only way.
How's that?
Yeah,
go ahead with your question.
Go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, So just to pick up where we left off, we were talking about the correct labeling of the war on Islam instead of the war on terror.
Yes.
I'm just wondering your opinion on why you think it even exists, because I've heard different speculations, to villainize Muslims in order to exploit the treasures and the natural resources in their country, or to villainize them because knowledge of how powerful the pure Islam is and how attractive that is to all different people around the world could demobile the whole philosophy of what the Western world is built off of. What's your opinion on why Islam has been villainized?
I don't want to speculate as far as what the motivations were of George W. Bush when he, started the global war on terror. That's basically a war against Islam. But I do think that, a lot of people, they end up realizing that you can get a lot of power when people are afraid. And there certainly could be a lot of various motivations all in play at the same time. So you could have somebody that just wants power domestically. And then they realize, oh, well, we can also take their oil. We can do this. We can install puppet dictators. And we can, overturn the entire cultural makeup of the Middle East if we keep doing, the following things. And, well, then we can have perpetual war. And that's good for the various companies that make machines and bombs and things that go boom. And so then, we just have this permanent war. And then it turns into sort of 1984 to where Eurasia has always been at war with East Asia, except for when Eurasia was not at war with East Asia, but in fact at war with Oceania. But, nobody remembers that because of what in 1984 they refer to as the memory hole. In modern culture, we refer to that as the Mandela effect, where people just misremember. No, the U.S. was never not bombing people over in foreign countries, and the people over there, they've always hated us. But I honestly do not think that anybody living in Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, or any of the other countries in the Middle East, North Africa, or what would be Western Southeast Asia. I honestly don't know if they even know that I exist, so I don't think that they hate me. They hate what the United States government is doing. And if you read the words that some of these people who have had family members killed, if you read what they tell reporters, they explain to you how terrorists, what the U.S. government considers terrorists, they explain how they are created. I remember reading a quote a couple of years ago from a man whose family was killed in one of these drone strikes where they were going to a wedding. And he said the U.S. government kills 10 of our people, but they recruit 100 to want to fight against them. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Red Dawn, the remake. They actually explained blowback in that movie, but it was done in such a way to where I don't think most people realized that they were explaining blowback. And I can explain blowback very simply in what I call bomb science, or the rules of bar fight, to where somebody punches me, I get upset, I throw a punch, and I hit somebody else, and they get upset, so they throw a punch and they hit me back. Only with bombs, it's the U.S. government drops a bomb on somebody, they get upset, they drop a bomb on the U.S. government gets upset, they drop a bomb, cycle continues, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, the only way to win is not to play the game. And it's been going on for so long that everybody forgets who threw the first punch. And we just need to stop it. And hopefully one day, and it's not going to be one of these things of the bombs stop and then tomorrow everybody in the Middle East is happy, because people are still going to be annoyed and ticked off. And I know people that are still pissed off at the Japanese for what happened in 1941. People that alive in 1941 are pissed off at the Japanese for what happened in 1941.
I know people that are pissed off at the North for what happened in 1861.
Right. So it's going to be separation.
I've got neighbors that are pissed.
Stop.
Well, if you're into the GOP, it seems like as far as labeling goes correctly, if President Obama would just say the words Islamic terrorism, all our problems would be solved.
Well, I'm fairly certain he's said those words before, but Republicans, the Republicans. Some people say that the Republicans have no principles. I disagree. The Republicans' principles are: we're not the Democrats, and we oppose everything they stand for. And the Democrats, they're also a party of principles. Their principles are: we're not Republicans, and we oppose everything they stand for. Libertarians are the true party of principle, or at least back at one time was the true party of principle. And that principle is that you own yourself, and no one has a higher claim to the fruits of your labor than you. No one has a right to a legitimate right to prevent you from doing anything that you want, as long as you do not cause unjust harm to another person. Sure. That's the true principles of freedom. And at one time, that was the core foundation of the Libertarian Party. Unfortunately, over the last decade plus, the Libertarian Party has sort of become a party of half measures and watered down messages. But I want to see the Libertarian Party again be that party of actual principle, the principle of self-ownership, the principle of what I call the equal rights principle, that nobody has more rights than anybody else. So I can't come over to your house and take your stuff, and I can't delegate that right to anyone else because I don't have it. And if I can't delegate a right that I don't have to a group, then that group can't delegate rights that they don't have to an even bigger group that calls themselves government.
All right. Well, Darryl, let me cut you off there. We're about out of time. Before we go, though, I want to give like a quick yes or no, up or down kind of thing for 4 or 5 questions.
Certainly.
Private arbitration contracts between Muslims based on Sharia, based on voluntary contracts. Yes or no?
As long as it's completely voluntary, yes.
Polygamy.
As long as it's completely voluntary, yes.
Aid to Israel or any other country for that matter.
I repeat myself, as long as it's completely voluntary, yes.
From the government.
Oh, no, not from the government. If you or your next door neighbor wants to send money over, then go for it. But any funds that wind up getting spent by a government are not voluntary.
All right. Well,
stolen money.
We're about a minute and a half, 2 minutes before the end of the show, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell everybody where your website is. And first, before we do that, I wanted to thank all of our panelists, Mike Haase in Ohio, Malak Fakhoury in Central Florida, and Shabahz in Georgia. Thank you guys for being on with us. And Ismail Abu Zaid Jardi in Oregon, who was on with us but not on with us. He with a technical issue again tonight. But thank you also for being here. So, Darryl, go ahead, promote your website. Tell everybody where they can find out about you more. Tell us where your next place you're going to speak, what debate is coming up that you're going to be in. You have the floor, brother.
Yeah, so first I want to thank everybody for coming on. I have greatly appreciated the conversation that we've had, and I honestly feel like we've learned from one another. You can learn more about the campaign at darrylwperry.com. One thing that's very interesting about the campaign is I'm not taking credit cards or checks. I'm only accepting alternative currencies for campaign contributions. So there's the Bitcoin address there. There's also a mailing address if you want to send precious metals. And I've got a thing where if you want to send some hotel points or air miles to help cover some of the travel, you can do that as well. DarrylWperry.com. That's DarrylWperry. And coming up this week in D.C. on Friday, I'm flying down, recording a debate with Public Square TV. Saturday, I'll be in Vermont at the Vermont Libertarian Convention. And then I've got the full schedule on the website. So it's right on the right sidebar, wperry.com.
Well, this is Will Coley with Call to Freedom. And